This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, let me call the meeting to order at 9:04. So I just sent out the agenda shortly afterwards, and it's been posted. I've modified it a little. A number of requests and invitations, and then we'll go directly to completing the review of the southbound API. So first one we've been carrying for a while. It's the open source firmware meetup, which is occurring at OCP. There's a spreadsheet which is online for people to add topics to be discussed at system firmware, OpenRMC, and security, I believe. And so I've taken an action to go ahead and add the two topics that we've been discussing in this work group project of the scoping questions of the interaction between RMC clients and controllers and whether there's an abstraction. And then the actual specific rack level manageability capabilities that should be supported by OpenRMC. And for the second one, I would actually direct them to the spreadsheet use case that we'll be discussing as a final topic if we have time. So you guys all are invited to go ahead and add changes to those, to add more specific topics. Rajiv or Sai, Rajiv, are there any more additions as to the format of that meetup? Is it going to be all day, or is it going to be partitioned?
It is like the room is open for 2 days, so it's up to the participants to kind of whenever they want to meet, they can meet and then do the discussion.
Okay, so it's actually whether this group wants to meet during that meetup time, and you've just set aside a conference room or location where we could meet.
Yeah, the conference room is, I think it opens from 8 to 5 on both days, and any team members, I think they can make use of it. And then when there is a keynotes or other talks, they can go out and then just come back. So it's again left it to the individuals or the teams.
Okay, so it's available 8 to 5. Okay, so I guess there's a question then. Is there any interest in how should we find the time? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I normally do. I'll create a doodle poll.
Yeah.
To see if there's a good time during OCP, because the first day I'm free, the second day I'm just booked solid with this thing.
Yeah, you can, the top.
You're pixelating. So Rajiv, was that you?
I'm sorry, John, but was it a question for me?
Oh no, someone was trying to talk. I didn't know who was trying to come on.
It wasn't me, but yeah, there was some audio issues somebody is having, I guess.
Okay, I think that's Mohammed, because he appears twice on mine.
Right. Yeah, I see that.
Mohammed, is that you? You're dropping in and out, and now you're out. Okay, so I would just put a doodle poll for a time to meet.
Sure. It's only one couple of topics, right? So I just added one topic like a couple of weeks back for the northbound API discussion.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah. If you want to kind of last week we had about like the southbound interfaces. That could be another.
Right. So I think anything that we don't finish up today, we can go ahead and deal with the ongoing topics directly there. We could use it as another meeting.
Right.
Okay. All right. So the next is an invitation. So there's an open invitation to, I think, most of OCP at this point for a kickoff social which will occur the evening prior to OCP Summit. It will be 69 logistics are listed, and it's being hosted by INSPIR, which I was hoping INSPIR would actually get to this meeting. There's a click through on the minutes. So when you look at the minutes on the wiki, you can go ahead and RSVP. Last request is for volunteers for moderators for the hardware management track. So the issue last year was most of the track owners were stuck in the track all day long. I believe Hemo and I own this track, and so this is a request for volunteers for anyone who actually wants to moderate, get in front of people, get known by the community. We have 11 sessions, so if we had one more moderator, we could get down to 3 or 4 sessions per moderator. And all the moderator does is he introduces the session and then asks for questions at the end. So it's a fairly low duty cycle amount of work. So I won't put anyone on the spot to volunteer now, but if you want to volunteer, please send me mail or him. Yes, just send me mail. Okay, and with that, Mohammed, are you on?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for your perseverance. Do you want to go ahead and bring up your slides and finish up the review?
Sure. Let me do that. I think I can share my screen now. Do you see my screen, John?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So last time I think we left here in the slide number 6. So what I would be doing here is the idea is to look at the current stuff, the available at the northbound interface, and then what's the respective URI for that function, and then what we can have at the southbound interface for that one-to-one mapping. So I was just drawing this comparison from one-to-one compared from north to south, and these are the few things that I picked on for comparison. For example, if we have service route, we expect the same thing over the southbound from any device for the rack manager and systems collection. So I was going one by one all of those APIs. So the idea here will be for me is to go and drill down all those APIs that are exposed at northbound so that we can do this one-to-one comparative analysis. And if we need to change some of those APIs at the southbound. So for example, one that popped up was like cell log. So I was not sure that for the cell log, we can have the same API or the same data structure available at the southbound from the interface. So was for like the chassis, sorry, not for the cell log, for the chassis. So because this is the thing that we need to discuss as a team to understand it better, because chassis at the northbound we expect is different, but for southbound, do we have chassis, or it can always be only a single node? So these are the things that I have to drill more. So was for the power and thermal in respect to the northbound comparison. For example, account was another example that I need to look into, but at this point I would say it's okay. And then the roles collection. These are the things that I will be going into in detail to pick on the respective API data structure, schemas and everything, to map it like a one-to-one mapping from south to north.
So I don't know if we want is a one-to-one mapping. So
Correct.
so what we need is a set of southbound interface requirements. And then after we get the requirements, then we map that to a set of a redfish interface or an IPMI interface.
So if you see like the use cases or the requirements will come directly from most of the requirement will come from north. So will it be an idea to say, okay, what are those requirements and what are needed at the southbound for those actions or those requirements?
Exactly. As that rack level command gets issued to the RMC,
Yes,
how do we envision it propagating down to the southbound?
correct.
So a rack level reset or power, right, becomes individual resets of each of the nodes. That's fairly simple. But some of these are more complex as to like account service. There is no use case that
Mm-hmm.
says that involves account service.
Uh-huh.
So even though it exists, right, we need to say the use case for an account service is I will synchronize all the accounts across the entire rack. Right? Why do I need access in the southbound to the account service on a node? I have to have done something up at the top to initiate all those commands to the individual nodes.
Yeah, so that's right, because I was thinking it will be a lot easier if we get the requirement exactly what
Yes.
is needed on the north, and then we drill those at the south. Obviously, there will be additional requirements that will, but most of the stuff at the south will be driven by stuff or the APIs call on the north. So, like you mentioned, the action for the reset or power off, those are very generic and very simple cases. But there will be cases, for example, like firmware update is one. Uh, Power management and monitoring will be another case that you want to see how much each node is consuming and how much is the capping for each node at the rack level. So those were the things that will be driving like more of kind of complex cases at the southbound.
Right. So I think this is a good step, but I think this step comes later. And what you'll actually come out with is you'll come out with the southbound. You won't even worry about the northbound interface at this point, right? You say, hey, this is the southbound requirement, right? And here's my southbound interface to get to that on each of the nodes,
Uh-huh.
right? And
Okay.
this necessity to map from one to the other is really not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact,
Okay.
if this mapped exactly, all you have is a proxy.
Yeah, we don't want a
Right.
proxy. That's correct. We don't want a
Right.
proxy, but just to build this understanding that uh, how there will be calls like for proxy. I mean, I'm not expecting a lot of changes at the rack level when there is like reset or power on and off. Uh, right?
Right. So
That will
so
be
so
like a
if
proxy.
if you look at the one of the scope vectors, right, is the situation where you don't use the abstraction, right, and you want to go directly to your individual systems as one of our scoping vectors, right? In that case, you do want a proxy. So that's what's strange about the RMC is at one end, we have people who want to use RMC as a proxy and reboot the system. And we at the other end, we wanted people who want to use the abstraction and hide all the complexity. So
Uh-huh.
and we'll get to this when we get to the table, right? As to exactly what should be in the initial scope of the RMC, given these very very distinct vectors. We're at the two ends of a spectrum coming off the gate, right? And so we have to
Uh-huh.
go figure out how we're going to create an initial RMC based on those two extrema. Okay.
Okay. That's good. At this point, like I would envision there will be actions uh, that will be tied just to a single node at the southbound, and there will be action that will be like an aggregate action. For example, you want to say, okay, power off few servers or all the servers in the rack. That's a use case, possible use case. That will be then mapped to different calls on the
Right.
southbound.
Right. So even on that reset, right now you have, when I see reset a rack, I reset everything in the rack, and you just added a flavor to it, which is I just want to reset a couple of servers on this rack, which means now I've exposed the complexity of the server in that it has multiple complexity of the rack in that it has multiple servers, and I want to distinguish some servers from other servers when I do my reset. So that's how quickly this thing can degenerate if you don't just say, "Hey, I'm just doing rack level stuff." It's a rack. It's a black box, and I'm going to do stuff to it, and you're going to hide the complexity, right?
Okay.
And
I
so that's why
that's good.
Yeah, that's why the
Uh-huh.
exploration of the use case is very important, because that will tell you what's going to happen on this outbound.
Okay. Cool. So this was just like I picked on these few these calls just to brainstorm on it, and then let what's the thought behind it, and what we will be going forward, possibly doing. So that's a good thing. Uh, the other thing that I have like this a diagram put in place. Uh, at the moment, there are a few things like naming that are tied to the Huawei product line. But Fusion Director is, for example, we assume is a management and orchestration. It can be any other scripting solution. And then we are exposing top of the rack switch, and then we have the rack manager. Rack manager is all at this point, I assume 1.6 implementation, and then we have all the nodes IBMC tied to it. P module, I would not pay attention at the moment for it's more tied to our power module that we have our native or custom implementation, but I would just simplified the name for it, like power module. Now, if you see all the interfaces from the south, from the nodes to the rack are Ethernet or Modbus over the serial lane. That's another, but as we had discussion in the last call, that Ethernet is our prime interface for rack to to the BMC or any other. So we are not changing anything there. The assumption at this point that BMC is going to provide, if we have, because these are the functionality that describing more that are tied to OR, like we have the hardware location. Hardware location means this is uh, the node location in the rack or in the chassis, the slot number, and then we have the power capping and everything that's handled by IBMC chipset as a BMC, and providing all the facilitating those things to the rack. And so is the discovery network configuration, and the BBUs and CDU and the NIC. This is just an overall picture, and then it's clearly will clarify some of our assumption that how we will be interfacing. And like here, if we have redfish, it's all good. We may not be doing a lot. That's what we had discussion about 2 weeks back. Primarily redfish is going to be the interface, but we expect or some kind of functionality will be exposed by some native commands or CLI or IPMI that will not be in compliance with the redfish. So,
Mohammed, this is Rajiv. I have a couple of questions.
yes, sir.
What is the battery board unit and the cooling distribution unit?
So,
Are these part of RMC, or do we want to support that as in our first implementation of RMC? What are your thoughts on that?
so my thoughts of the cooling and everything we should be managing it from the rack manager here, and we assume these are a separate pool of that we will be managing it. If we put this under the IBMC, currently we are doing it for our product line, but we have the intention to move away all those into the rack, so that we have a single power module that handles the battery backup, and and the cooling, so that we can distribute these resources in case to other units. But the intention is to move away all those into a separate pool.
Oh, okay. Okay, that helps. That helps. So the second question I had was that in this diagram, do we have two chassis with one rack manager per chassis, and it's being managed by the orchestration engine, which is the Fusion Director. So I guess the question here is, um, you know, are you envisioning support for RMC managing multiple chassis, or they still work independently and it's just the orchestration engine that manages the individual RMCs?
So if you remember in our last slide, I mean, first of all, the question is is a good question, because we are still wondering whether we expect rack manager to handle just one rack or multiple. So as we, in this diagram, we see each rack is managing one, rack manager is managing one rack in this diagram, and so is the case in this diagram. And then we are pulling up these information or rolling up these information to the orchestration, which is in this case in the Fusion Director. But if we provide an extension, like we in the previous diagrams, or like last time we had discussion on, we can have this rack manager linked to this rack, so that we can provide this as an extension. And one rack, we can think of this rack as a prime re-rack, and then this one as a secondary, and so other all. So the idea will be is to have linked all these other racks to the one primary rack, and primary rack will be the main interface for the managing. But these are just the design discussion we going forward we can have. But my personal envision is both are possible, as long we have the extension available at the rack manager, or in the yes, in the OpenRMC implementation.
Right. And I think Sriram from Microsoft did confirm that we need to do some connection issue. We need to sort out some connection issues, but apart from that, it should work flawlessly. And they support multi-chassis management as well. So,
But
which is
that becomes one of the scoping questions, well, whether the RMC manages one rack or multiple racks. So that just becomes another vector we need to go decide on when we decide the initial implementation.
I
Yeah,
think,
from the
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
from technical perspective, I don't see a lot of challenges. I mean, there will be some design consideration for the hardware, but from the system management, or on the OpenRMC, I'm not expecting a lot of challenges, since we have everything mostly managed over the IP or over the Ethernet, so we will not be having a lot of problems. It will be just
Okay. So I have a question on this Ethernet Modbus over serial. So I know nothing about Modbus. So I assume this is a serial connector, but
assume
it
that's
runs an Ethernet protocol over it.
so assume it's a serial, not an Ethernet.
No.
What,
So my interfaces are defined by protocols and wires, right? So the wire is a serial port line,
uh,
but
uh-huh.
but the protocol over above it is Ethernet,
And a serial is just like a serial bus you connect to the management port.
right?
Yeah, so I'm not expecting there will be an Ethernet. It's just a physical wire you spreading from the from
I
direct manage.
understand. I understand that, but what's this line saying? Ethernet
Oh,
slash
so
Modbus over
or
serial port.
it's Ethernet or sorry, it should not be or. It's
Ah.
Ethernet or Modbus. Yeah, I should have put this like
Okay, no,
or.
that's fine. But you can put you're running Ethernet protocol over a serial port. Is that what that line
No,
means?
no, no. It's Ethernet or Modbus over
Got
serial.
it, got it. Okay, so if it's running Ethernet, then it's an IP protocol, and you can run
Yes.
Redfish over it. If
Uh-huh.
it's running Modbus, you cannot run Redfish over it
Correct.
because. Okay,
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So on the
Yeah.
south side of the southbound interface of the rack manager, is it connected up to this Modbus, or is it only connected up if there's an Ethernet?
Oh, say
And I
again.
can,
I'm skipping that point.
okay, so I'm looking at the southbound interface of the RMC, right?
Okay.
And if it's connected to, so southbound, we know one of them is Redfish.
Uh-huh.
Does another one have to be Modbus over serial, or is that something
No, so
unique to you guys?
no, this is something we have our custom implementation, and we were looking for consideration where we cannot have an IP, or we have for debugs or some of the admin challenges. If we cannot reach over Ethernet, so what are the alternative we have? It's a longer route if we choose that one, but that is something that is more for when the Ethernet is failing, or if there is a hardware failure, or the TCP/IP stack on the IBMC or the RAID is not able.
Okay.
We're not able to reach, so that we will be just using those hardwired um, serial connection to debug the issues from the rack manager. It's just a thought process. Yeah.
Okay, so on the far right, where you have the southbound interface, and it connects up, it crosses this line that goes to the BBU and CDU. Is that actually connected?
No, it's not connected. It's just
Okay,
showing like these are the
that,
southbound interfaces.
that's
Yeah.
fine. I didn't know if there was a PM bus thing we had to go deal
No.
with. Yeah. Okay. And finally, since I talked about this spectrum, whether you go through an abstraction or whether you basically go directly to systems, do you have a rack manager today? And
We. Uh-huh.
and do you use it as a proxy mechanism to get to your individual servers, or do you go through an abstraction to hide
So
all the complexity?
yeah, at the production level, we are close to that, but there are something that we have done over like what you see in the figure. Yeah, so that we call it, or there is an internal name to it. But we are using exactly what you are seeing on the screen now. The challenge for us is that we are not using all of Redfish. There are part of Redfish, but there are some sort of IPMIs and some other native CLI commands that we are using to manage it.
So that rack box is a rack manager?
Yes, it's a rack
Okay.
manager.
Okay.
And to the previous question, like you were asking, so for example, in this case, we assume we are all using IBMCs. So if we have like an aggregated function coming down from the top, so we have to spread that all across all IBMCs in the array. So there will be singular and aggregated functions. So we have to then analyze the use and functionality of such cases at the southbound interface. So this picture will help at least me to understand what will be an aggregated function or ask or action, or will it be a singular action that comes down from the rack manager.
Okay, so you deal with a single action to the rack, and you handle the abstraction in the rack manager and talk to the individual IBMCs.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But there's also a situation where you talk directly to the IBMCs. And let's say we boot a single server.
Okay. Yeah, because if we put that structure in place, I know there will be a lot of discussion whether we should have access to the direct access to the BMC or not. Initially, the understanding it's going to be a lot easier if we don't have that direct access, because then there will not be a lot of advantages of the rack manager of the open RMC if we have direct access to the IBMC. And at the orchestration layer, we will have to deal with all and every IBMC. So for BMC, assume the idea was to have group the things in a rack and group the things in a rack for, like, assume I have the firmware update from one rack to another. So, or pull up the whole rack, power off the rack, half of the rack. So those are the things that uh, are easy to manage from the rack manager rather than having an individual access to the BMC. So currently we are at the design level in our stuff. We have very limited access, direct access to the IBMC. Although IBMC has everything what you can expect from a standalone IBMC, but we are providing very limited access in case where we have the private VLAN configured for IBMC,
Hmm.
or the network is not accessible from outside. So you want to talk to the rack manager and drill down. The rack manager is going to drill down all those uh, to the points over the private network. So there are security concerns that we want to hide, and we want to put a carpet on uh, by using only direct access to the rack manager.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mohammed, one more question. And I'm sorry, I forgot. Which company are you representing? I'm sorry, I should know that.
Oh, that's a good. I'm representing Huawei.
Huawei. So
Yeah,
this fusion director, is it a it's proprietary to Huawei, right? It's the
it is.
orchestra. Do you guys plan to open source it?
At this point, it's no. I mean, no. There is no plan for open sourcing the Fusion Director, but it's gonna be out in the market maybe in 2 or 3 months. So yeah, Fusion
So,
Director is a Huawei built
so,
solution for the business.
so I don't think the question is about Fusion Director. It's about this rack manager, which is below the Fusion Director.
No, I
Well,
mean, maybe his question was more about how we better provide those orchestration and management.
exactly, because ultimately, once we have this things and management in place, then we need an orchestration engine that would manage, right? Which we don't have it, and we don't talk about it right now because that's maybe out of scope right now.
It is very out of scope.
Yes.
So, but that's fine. Just wanted to bring this one up in our discussion. But good to know that you guys
Yeah.
have something similar.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go into the detail, but the thing is that Fusion Director is more of like a container orchestration, and it's a more containerized solution. So at the moment, what we are doing, everything is containerized, so we can pull down the microservice just for the firmware update or the OS. That's what we have things put in place there. So just for FYI.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Mohammed.
Cool. Uh, the other thing that I have, just like a sequence diagram, what we can expect the control will flow through point A to Z. So at this point, I would assume as we hook in an IBMC or a BMC chip or a server into the rack manager, so the rack manager is gonna be detect the port, and then it will send out an LLDP for the discovery. In return, IBMC or the new node have just injected into the chassis or to the rack will return the serial number. Serial number, I mean, other it's an identifier for us. Other vendor may have a different identifier like service tag or any other, and then we return an IP along with it. Uh, Rack manager is gonna, now it has the IP and it can do everything to the IBMC over Redfish and Ethernet. And then rack manager at the same time can push these information upstream to the Fusion Director or any other orchestration solution. Uh, Fusion Director will have the whole uh, IP pool, the whole IPAM, so it can grab a new IP and push that down for the IP configuration and if it we want. So if you see at this point, we are not allowing any direct access to the IBMC. So we want rack manager to handle all those PAN. I assume everything to the right is private, uh, to the folks on the left. So only Rack Manager is the interface that has direct access to the hardware in the private environment. That was the intention. That is still the intention. At least we are not changing some of our design diagrams based on those measurement we have internally done. And
So,
then,
Mohammed, one more question. I apologize. So for this, RM being the middleman here, which does all the discovery and configuration, have you guys shared this code with us?
no, it's not. It's in the development. It's just I'm sharing the very higher level design that can help the whole OpenRMC. I assume RM is the OpenRMC, and if we provide OpenRMC as the only management for the hardware on the south side, or the southbound, that will help us, and that will help us overall the businesses to think about more of their secure environment and our private. If you look into the big customer, it's rare to see customer exposing their hardware or infrastructure. Even for the management, they just allow one or two IPs to that you can ping to. Everything else below that are kept private. So that was the intention. No, we have not
Right.
shared any of this.
So, John, a question for you, and I think we still have not figured out what code base should we use as a default code for the development. Do you have any timeline in mind? Because I know Google talked about it, Penguin talked about it, and I think Sai also talked about it some, and Sriram also talked about it from Microsoft. So, do you know when we would be in a position to what do you call it? Decide? You
Uh,
know,
well, the process that I outlined, feel free to change the process, is that we prioritize the use cases that we have, and then use that to drive as the context of which we go and try to select one a source code base from which to start from. So that's why I've been trying to make sure the use cases get done, because that would tell us what's, you give us a context when we're looking through the code, um, which one would be better suited for that implementation, because the working assumption was we were going to use Microsoft's code, and then each vendor, each community member would look at that code base and decide, quote, how much work it would take to add the additional functionality if they needed it into that code base. Right, and then I believe the next meeting, Microsoft will give us a code walkthrough of their code. So by that time, we should have the use cases in place that we have to go add to the source code base, and we can use that to make a decision on what source code base to move forward with.
it's good to know, John. I mean, we hopefully in the next couple of weeks we should be locking in, the code base as the default code base for development. Okay, that's good. Sorry, Mohammed, please go ahead.
No, that's a
So,
good
so
conversation.
So one question I was going to mention actually on this diagram is that the top right part about discovery is yet something else that we need to add to the plate for OpenRMC is the discovery mechanism, because this is one discovery mechanism. I'm sure everyone has their own. And so we've been focusing on the low level stuff, right? The refish interface of the IMBMC and what needs to go across there, but we haven't really looked at the discovery mechanism.
Yeah, and if you remember, our discovery mechanism, our use case was the very first use case that we brought up, and that's how we we kick off the game after we discover the device. And OpenRMC, what will be the mechanism? We have something that is just for internal for Huawei, but there are cases that we can bring up more and into the more open community. Those use cases, how we are doing and how we are dealing with those challenges with the discovery. Uh, it appears very easy on the diagrams, but there are as you know, there are some always been challenges with the discovery mechanism into the rack manager.
Okay.
Cool. So one thing in this diagram that I would like to highlight is if you see, we can set the IP with 6 and everything in once, and this one is not basically something we allow, but I was trying to just highlight the points that we will be breaking this, or we should have this direct access to the IBMC. We, as from our internal use cases, we are not recommending it, but this is a way, like we earlier talked about it. So, okay, this is the diagram that, and after that, yeah. So that would be my last a slide to show and talk about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Thank you, sir.
So with that, I'm going to share this again and go to, here it goes. So this is a document which I posted a while back. I'm refreshing to see if anyone else made entries into it. Okay, so this is posted as the use case spreadsheet of of what use cases we want to support with OpenRMC. Was there a comment?
John, sorry, I should have done by now, but I got stuck into summer, so I'll be filling this on today.
Okay, thank you. I understand. So I created. So let me explain it first. So this stuff has two tables. One is rack level use cases, which is what do I want to do if I have access to the rack manager? I'm going to deal with some abstraction, and I don't care about the complexity underneath. On the other end of the spectrum is the RMC as more of a proxy, and so these are per node use cases that I want to be able to isolate a server and go interact with that explicitly. And I believe that's multiple pages. And so one was, so in answering the columns, right, it is what do you want to do at the rack level across the entire rack, and what do you want to do at the individual node level. And so this illustrates the spectrum. So Facebook says the operational model is we deal with directly with the server, and when we operationally, and only in cases where we can't do that do we go back to a rack manager and say, well, can I go reboot this thing so I can get back to my normal operational mode? So in their case, they don't have a need for rack level power on, reset, or shutdown. What they do need is they need direct access to the nodes, so they can go find the node they're concerned about and go reset it as necessary. And when it comes back up, they'll connect to it directly and manage it directly. Okay. On the other end are the vendors that prefer an abstraction, where they actually want to do a power on reset of the entire node, of the entire rack. And so that's what this spreadsheet allows us to demonstrate. So my goal here is actually to get everyone who participates in this community to add that. I will bring this up. Excellent. I will bring this up at the meetup, and hopefully we can get other people in the community to go ahead and add their rows. And out of this, I add a final row of what will be in RMC. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so once we have this, we have a set of use cases that we want to propagate. We can use this to go drive the northbound interface specification, and we can use this to map to southbound interface requirements.
Right.
And we can also, once we have that, we can also now go look at, and once we have that information, we can go look at the source code bases and figure out which ones we want to whether we want to adopt one or more source code bases to go implement this RMC.
Okay.
Okay. Does everyone okay with that methodology?
Yep.
That makes
Okay.
sense.
So with that, I can go back to my agenda. Minutes. Okay. So with that, we've completed this review. We've looked over the use cases. My question was whether we were ready to do a starting set yet, and if Huawei needs to his input, and we should wait for feedback from OpenRMC from the meetup, we can go ahead and do that. And so our next meeting on the 19th, we can go ahead and start on maybe setting up a set of prioritized use cases. Okay. With that.
So, John, the question I have for, do we want to put those specific use cases with in an Excel sheet for the southbound interface? Is that the plan going forward? That's what I'm thinking.
State that question again.
Like, do we have? Would it be better to put all those use cases in a spreadsheet for the southbound interface? Like, separate them. What are the aggregated function, and what will be a singular node action? What will be the use cases, the flows for example, power management, firmware update, and all those kind of stuff.
I don't know if a spreadsheet is the best mechanism, but I would say take power on, right, and say that's your northbound request, right? And so what does that translate into? What does the rack manager do, right? And based on that, and so that should drive exactly what should be on the southbound requirement. It's really simplistic, right? But and so it's not a matter of us all getting in a room and doing another set of columns, right? The southbound requirements is being driven by the northbound interface. So once we have the northbound
I
interface
understand,
use
yeah.
cases, right, we should be able to specifically understand what that conversion should be to the southbound, and we may need to agree upon it because some people may or may not agree whether resets should be across the entire thing simultaneously, or whether it should be staged so you don't increase the power draw too much because you reset everything at the same time. So there's a lot of things that is not intuitively obvious when you do this at the rack level.
There are very obvious cases, so I wanted to say, okay, if we start off with those obvious cases like power and reset, and then relate to some of the complex cases. So that was my thought behind it. So we can start with those obvious and then get into the more territory where it more depends on the north.
Yeah, if you do a example case, right, you can get end to end to it, right? You can go from northbound all the way to set of southbound requirements, and that will set the methodology that we use for each one of these use cases.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
So,
and
John,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please finish your thought. No, I can talk later.
Oh, okay. The only thing in looking at this slide in spreadsheet was I really should move this thing down here because this talks about rack components, which in fact is the node. So in the future, you'll just see this put down here, which means that each node should have the ability to update its firmware and have an interface to go do that. So this is to update the firmware at the rack level, and it should translate to updating firmware. Yeah, I don't have it. Updating firmware at the node level. Okay. Any other questions?
So John, I had just one, not a question, but more of an information, is that currently, we have a little bit of inconsistency in our licenses that we are using it for our RMC project. And in fact, Sriram was there in the call, and I thought I'm going to ask him this question, but he dropped off. So
I think he's still on.
no, I don't see him.
Hi, this is Sriram from Microsoft.
Oh, I'm glad you're here, man, because you saved me in writing another email. So thank you very much. So
Sure.
I have questions for you. The first question is based on the that I sent a few days ago is that, if you look at the Microsoft contributions to Open Compute so far, like the Sonic has around like 20 repos, and they are heavily on Apache 2. And in fact, Intel is also going to contribute to RMC, and they would like to contribute using Apache 2. The OpenBMC project, which is under Linux Foundation, and Sai is here as well, and he can always talk more about it, is based on Apache 2.0. The only caveat is that the RMC code that you guys, could contribute a couple of months ago is using GPL-v2, which is very restrictive. So we need to downgrade this GPL-v2 to Apache 2. So I wanted to get your thoughts on if that's something that you would be able to do that in your next code drop that is expected in March.
Yeah, I will keep that in mind, and I will communicate with legal, and that shouldn't be an issue, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that should not at all be an issue. Absolutely, and because had it been the other way around, from like Apache to GPL-v2, that's complicated and doesn't make sense. But in this example, I think it's very straightforward. So if you could keep us in the loop.
Well, to add
Sure.
to that, I think the other reason for choosing Apache 2 was we wanted to have consistent licensing schemes with OpenBMC in the event that we can collaborate or merge code or share code back and forth. And I think that's really important for this project.
Agree. Yeah.
Absolutely, Bill. Thanks for making that statement. Yeah. So yeah, Sriram, please keep us in the loop. And John, I mean, you don't have to wait for this. Just let me know where. And I know you mentioned it's going to take a couple of more weeks for you guys to be ready to contribute your rack design code. Just let me know, and I can actually do that for you. I will do that for you. John, are you still there?
Oh, yes. Muted, but I'm still here. Yes.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So just let me know when you're ready to share the code that you talked about, and I will merge it with our existing code base.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
I think everyone should know what we're doing. I think we're putting all the contributions into their own repository, and then because right now the OpenRMC repository is it only has links to these other contributions, and there's nothing actually in OpenRMC yet. So.
Right. Yeah. Right now, I've created symbolic links, and I have created just one place where you can see all those symbolic links.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to dig through multiple links in different directories, and eventually that structure should change once we factor out the base code.
Right.
Yeah, and then we can.
You just use the term merge, and then GitHub that has a specific meaning. I want to make sure everyone understood that we hadn't done anything yet with.
We haven't done those mergings at all. So yeah, exactly. So it will come once we have the process laid out.
Okay. All right, guys. So I think I'm down to our end of my agenda. So next meeting will be the 19th, when Microsoft will give us a code walkthrough of the code base. And so with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 9:58. Thank you, guys. I will see you at the OCP Summit.
All right, we'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, guys.